Welcome to another episode of Grace on Tap. Grace on Tap is a podcast dedicated to the history and the theology of the Lutheran Reformation, all over nice cold beer.
I'm Evan Gaertner.
And I'm Mike Yagley. Well, we're going to get started continuing our discussion on Frederick the Wise. Now, the last several discussions on Frederick the Wise have been mostly about the background, about what it was like being a prince, and a powerful prince in the pre-Reformation era.
Yeah, because the Holy Roman Emperor is not a hereditary empire in a way that certainly each prince has some hereditary power, but the role of the emperor is not. There are people that are called electors. Right. And that office of elector in many days probably doesn't matter until there is an election.
Right. And when that election hits, he's the most important. They are, the seven of them are the most important people in
because they're involved in electing the next Holy Roman Emperor.
They get 7 votes, and they've got those electors during that period have to leverage that small slice of time very judiciously, very wisely, in order to maximize what they get out of that brief period where they can really get something out of the emperor.
So there's been Maximilian, and now his grandson Charles is going to be elected, and that is something we covered last episode as we talked about Maximilian traveling and taking kind of a circuitous route, ending up becoming ill, and before he died, he was working as much as he could to get everything prepared for Charles or Karl, however you would call him, to become the next emperor, and it lines up that way.
Right. And all of this is happening just at the very beginning of the Reformation, right around 1517, 1518 time frame. So let's just sort of get everybody caught up again. So Luther's talking about Luther's teachings during this time. They're not very radical at all. They're pretty straightforward. Let's just clean up the worst of the corruption around indulgences was his first point of interest, and then it started to grow out from there.
And that's where he's going to get a lot of agreement from Erasmus and some of the humanists that thought that generally, let's be positive, there's just a few bad apples. Yeah. That was kind of the impression. But Luther's discussion and readings and writings are going to lead him to realize it's not just a few on the surface things. Spit and polish will be all shiny again. It's more fundamental than that.
Now, to give you an idea of just how mild his teachings were during this time, at this moment,
like 1518, 1519, we've had the 95 Theses, and yet still he has not clearly stated that indulgences are absolutely wrong. He only states that they were being abused.
He's also stated that, follow the Pope. The Pope is the rightful leader of the church. That's a second point that he's made. His most radical position, which actually did give Frederick a little bit of heartburn, was the idea of giving both the bread and the wine to the laity during communion. Now, when I was a kid, I was a Catholic, and they did not give us wine during communion.
Now, you've been to Mass more recently?
And they started...
It's offered, but I've attended a few Masses where it's clear, I'd say, at least at the parish I went to for a funeral, 90% of the people went up and received the host and just walked past the person that was offering the wine.
It depends on how they're offering the wine. That's right. They have the common cup typically, and people are just like, no germs for me, and they move on.
Do you think that it's more of a germ thing and less preserving the fact that I'm a lay person and I should only receive the bread?
When I was a kid, so this was implemented when I was 10 years old or something. That was the first time I had communion in the bread and the wine, and the first time they offered it, everybody took it. It was early on. There was a lot of like, okay, great. And so everybody was taking the bread and the wine at first, or most people were. And I wouldn't be surprised if, with COVID and everything else, that people started getting a little bit more nervous about that. But at least when I was a kid, in grade school and middle school and even through high school, everybody took both the bread and the wine. I wasn't aware that people had stopped taking it. That's sort of surprising to me.
Yeah, I'd say that's. I haven't gone to a Sunday morning mass, but this is more funerals for people I know. Attending there, so
And that's going to be a lot of
different
people.
setting.
That's going to be a lot of people who aren't Catholic will show up at something like that. So, but anyway, I remember, to give you an idea of how, because in the Counter Reformation period, the Catholic Church doubled down on all, so you had the Reformation, you had the Counter Reformation.
So this is Council of Trent, right after Luther dies, 1547 and following.
Exactly.
It's the Council of Trent, and some people identify the Counter Reformation as the start of the modern Catholic Church.
I would agree. But they really did double down on a lot of those doctrines that Luther was fighting against. And one of those doctrines was no wine for the laity. And that was even continuing into the 60s and early 70s when I was a kid.
So at least at this point, this topic of communion in both forms, bread and wine, for some people that seems like the most radical thing Luther's talking about. The Pope himself has not effectively communicated what issues he may have with Luther, where some people may think that anybody that Luther is criticizing, maybe the Pope would also criticize him if he really knew what was going on. There's almost this hope by some that the Pope just doesn't know. And if the Pope saw what Luther saw, then of course he'd also be criticizing the same things.
That is certainly what Luther was thinking originally. And it took him a while to sort of realize that the Pope knew exactly what was going on. But at that point, in 1518, we're talking about 1518 time frame, Luther was really believing that the Pope was innocent in all of this, and that there were a bunch of people around him who were misdirecting the Pope.
And the people who were kind of trying to silence Luther, part of their comments was, what you're saying, Luther, might be right, but you're doing it in an insubordinate way. You need to be more respectful.
Yeah.
And that's, the Pope himself said Luther must be stopped because he is being insubordinate.
Right. Now, the princes, because Luther was being sort of just a reformer, truly, he wanted to stay Catholic. He wanted the Catholic Church to stay together. He wanted the Pope to stay as the leader of the Catholic Church. All he wanted was a reformation, especially of the indulgences, about the getting money for penance. A lot of people were supporting him. The princes all liked Luther's teachings, and a big part of that was because it shifted the scales of power in their favor. The
weaker the Pope is, the more strong the estates are and the nobles are.
Right, and it also makes more money available to them. The
Yes.
Pope's taking this money out of the system for himself, and the princes can tax more, for example.
So if indulgences are being sold and that money is going back to the Pope, that same quantity of money could have been taxed by the nobles.
Right.
And so
it has nothing to do with the church or the Bible, or a lot of the dynamics that are happening through this period are about power and about money. And the church had gotten itself so deeply into the economies of each of the of European economy that they sort of it sort of screwed up it absolutely screwed up the gospel. The primary work of the church was we'll say overshadowed by money and power.
So for the predatory princes, reducing indulgences allowed the princes the possibility to increase their income. So there's the economics at work. But Rome is maybe also theological. Who knows?
I guess I'm not buying it, but go on.
Rome was working hard to entrap Luther. They had sent Karl von Militz. We've talked about him before. He is kind of this guy that's connected, who, based on his resume of resources of who he's related to, should be up to the task.
But he wasn't.
But he wasn't. He has pedigree, but not the quality. But to recognize, as much as we might want to say Karl von Militz failed at his job,
there's
even Karl Cajetan also struggled at it.
Exactly. And we have to sort of remember, people tend to think of the first time I ever heard of Millet's, right? I heard he was incompetent. He was, there was a lot of pejoratives thrown his way. But when you look, Cajetan to this day is studied in Catholic colleges. He's one of the greatest thinkers of Catholic thinking of that period, and he couldn't even trap Luther. We should be probably a little more fair to Millet's. He was given a big job, and he certainly wasn't up to it. But I don't think anybody really was, because the Pope was in the wrong, in all honesty.
So insubordination, that's the big complaint against Luther. And the issue, though, for Luther's going to get revealed in 1520, that it's not just that he isn't playing by the rules of who you're supposed to bow to. He really does have issues.
And he has valid issues. And everybody agrees. Even some many supporters of the Pope agree that Luther's right in a lot of these issues. They might disagree with the way he's doing it. They might disagree. But a lot of people are on Luther's side in 1520.
Not enough, because in 1520, the Pope issues a bull of excommunication.
Exactly.
Exsurge Domine, and we've covered Exsurge Domine in other podcasts, so we're just going to summarize it. It is an official declaration that Luther is a heretic and that he should be excommunicated.
And remember, and I know we've said this in previous discussions, but to be excommunicated means you are really a non-person, and you can be killed
out of the community.
You can be killed with no problem. You're like a Turk. You're like, yes. It's okay to kill people who are not Christians in this era. Theologically speaking, and it was it's a weird theology, but it's what was the functional theology at that time.
In terms of kind of that sense of violence that you describe, in Wittenberg University in 1520, there's just other issues besides Luther. There's this topic of the apprentices of Lucas Cranach, a pharmacist and artist of Wittenberg. I think he was a pharmacist. And students and apprentices are threatening each other with knives.
Yeah.
People are... students are like, this is like, some sort of Broadway show where people are going to start dancing and bringing knives to
like
fights.
The Jets and the Sharks.
Yes.
Yeah. No, what's happening is that the apprentices of Lucas Cranach, for their work, are carrying around knives. And so the students, and they start threatening the students. That they go out drinking, and the students are in one part of the bar, and the apprentices of Cranach are in the other part of the bar, and the apprentices start threatening the students. And so the students start arming themselves with knives, and they're starting to get ready. It's exactly like the Jets and the Sharks, or the Bloods and the Crips, or something.
So Wittenberg is a university. You've got these academics, you've got these students, and you've got this sort of rise of enlightenment where there's this intellectualism, but you also have this rise of a merchant class of skill-based labor. And in the background of that, you also have the nobles that are trying to maintain their power. And in 1525, we'll have the peasants' revolt. So inside of Wittenberg, you have theological issues. You Enlightenment versus skill-based labor kind of issues. Students' unrest in Wittenberg, we can kind of laugh about it, but it just gives you a sense of the color of the era is not that everybody every day is talking about Luther. Although I did just recently read that Luther published 25% of the pamphlets that were, he wrote 25% of the pamphlets, brochures, treatises that were shared in Germany in the 1520s.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
We describe all these kind of colorful things that are going on, and we try to give this impression it's not all Luther.
But it's all Luther.
But a lot of it is Luther.
Well, but I think the bigger thing that we're trying to capture here is that the whole era is a powder keg. It's a period. We happen to be living through a period of change. They were living through a period of even greater change in a lot of ways, and so people are wanting to kill each other for no reason. These are college students wanting to get into knife fights with artists apprentices for no reason. Yeah. And the peasants just a couple of years later decide they're going to revolt. And then you throw Luther and the Reformation into all of this.
So the comfortable order of things where everybody knows their place is starting to get overturned. Kings lead princes who have knights. All of this sense of feudalism is starting to break down. And there's a lot of discussion on how exactly this happens. And one theory is that the plague had wiped out so many people, it opened up opportunities for many of the peasants. Essentially, a capitalistic meritocracy is starting to build. When you have 60% of people in a town die of a plague like that, it's going to instantly change power structures in those towns. And this happens throughout Europe.
Yeah. And so this and then, hey, my neighbor's making a lot of money now. Why can't I get mine? And and so there's this competition. There's a lot happening right at the same time.
The lowest level of the feudal order, the knights, they feel the pinch first. They're kind of reducing. They're finding their income streams are getting reduced as the number of peasants is reduced because of the plague. And some of the knights have to develop their own kind of revenue stream in between times when they're sent to war. Right. So the knights are kind of like these mercenary armies that when they're sent to war, they're paid. When they're not being sent to war, they have to figure out their own source of income.
So they become like gangs or the mafia, where they'll show up into a city and they'll say, oh, a really nice city you got here. Would be a terrible thing if something would happen to it, but you can pay us in order to protect it. So they start charging protection money for different cities, and it's this crazy time where and then you throw in the middle of all this the humanists, right?
Yeah, Erasmus is encouraging people to become thinkers, to go back to the source and not just take as truth what someone says to you, but go read it for yourself.
So everything's up in the air, and Luther and Erasmus and the power structures and everything is changing. And so
even Frederick, in the midst of this, he just wants a safe, secure electoral Saxony.
Yeah, and that's and he's trying to keep electoral Saxony strong and safe. And it's really hard to keep Luther alive through all of this, but he's doing everything he can, and it takes all of his strength to do that.
So this is the background in which the bull of excommunication, Exsurge Domine, arrives. It has threatened Luther with excommunication. It's put this threat of incredible violence in play, because once someone's declared excommunicated, the persona non grata outside of community, and yet Frederick is going to do everything he can to keep Luther in community, because if community is strong, then electoral Saxony is strong.
So, as the Pope was writing Exsurge Domine in the spring and early summer of 1520, Frederick and his spies, he had plenty of spies throughout Europe. Frederick knew it was a very poorly kept secret that it was happening, but Frederick knew it was coming, and he was working to try to prepare for it, but there wasn't really a whole lot he could do. He maintained his position that, as far as when it came to Luther, this was Frederick's standard position when talking to anybody about Luther was, he's just a professor, I'm just a prince, he's an expert in theology, I'm just a churchgoer. I leave the whole religious theological stuff to the experts, and there are experts who say Luther is right. There are experts that say Luther is wrong. I don't know. I'm just staying out of it.
So Frederick responds to the bull of excommunication with a letter that includes these words: I have never defended either the writings or the sermons of Dr. Martin Luther. Moreover, I hear that Dr. Luther is ready to obediently appear before just, convenient, disinterested, and prudent judges to defend his doctrine in person. This is an opportunity. Frederick is showing a skill of diplomacy here. First of all, he says, I hear. So
He's
creating
distancing.
an air gap
Yeah.
between him and Luther.
Right.
Then he says that Luther's ready to be obedient. But to be obedient, he needs a body, an audience, before someone who's just. Convenient.
That's an interesting term that he put in there.
Yeah, and that word convenient is going to keep Luther in Germany. It's inconvenient to travel to Rome. Rome, you've got all these great theologians in Germany. Let's have this be done by Germans in German.
That gives you a real sense of Frederick's political acumen, that in this short sentence, he lays out almost his whole strategy for saying no to the Pope. If the Pope comes back, okay, we'll have Luther obediently come to Rome. No, I'm sorry, that's not convenient. I specified that it had to be convenient. We're not going to send him to Rome. We want to keep it here in Germany, where unsaid, where Frederick has a little bit more influence, has a lot more influence on the outcome of whatever's going on.
So this demand is not quite a demand. This is the other way he writes it, is that he starts by saying, I've never defended this guy, but if we are going to talk about this guy, let's do it this way. It is a demonstration that Frederick is saying Luther is ready to appear, but it needs to be done in a way that's fair.
Right.
And I appreciate that question of fairness. Even in our own kind of political time right now, the judicial system is being ascribed as an Obama appointee or a Bush appointee or a Trump appointee. That judges are not becoming...
Well, they're not seen as being fair anymore.
Right.
Which is unfortunate. That's... for most of my life, I was oblivious to who appointed anybody. It didn't matter. If a judge said it, it was fair. But now this is a highly political, divided country at the moment.
And so Frederick is saying that really the only way for a fair hearing to happen is in Germany, which is quite a statement about what Frederick thinks about Rome.
That is, he's almost coming out and saying that the Pope is not being fair. And that's, he's, again, very careful about the way he puts things. But that is a roundabout way of saying exactly that.
We're at a spot where we're about to talk about how this bull of excommunication arrives into Germany. It's going to get there in the late summer of 1520. By December 1520, the deadline checkpoints that were placed into that bull of excommunication are going to arrive, and Luther's going to burn a bunch of documents. He's going to burn the bull of excommunication and a bunch of other canon law documents in the courtyards of Wittenberg. Before we get all to that, we want to tell you about the beer that we are featuring today. This is Vorsteiner Oktoberfest Special Edition. It is light and golden in color. It's got a crisp flavor, but it's also, I think, got strong flavors of caramel. It's described as kind of a mix between the light-flavored Dortmunder Festbier and the more traditional Marzen, which would be that kind of dark caramel. Like Sam Adams Oktoberfest is a strong Marzen beer. Very caramel, very dark, almost a red beer.
This is very light. It's a very light beer. And
as light as it is, though, it's 5.9% ABV.
Yeah. You wouldn't guess, honestly. Mm-hmm. It goes down real smooth. You don't think...
I don't feel like I'm consuming a ton of calories or something.
No, it doesn't feel like you're a lot of punch here, but it's got a little bit of kick if you have enough, I'm sure.
Another review described it also as having a very bready, like bread flavor to it. And
I guess I'm not picking up on that. He said that in that review over and over again. He talked to bready, and I was,
I wonder if it's the sweetness, almost like a white sweet bread.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's a really good beer.
And so we're going to be releasing this episode here in the fall of 2025, and people will be celebrating Oktoberfest. Some people might be heading out to Munich and having some great celebrations. And there's Oktoberfest celebrations. Our shepherd, where I'm the pastor at, on September 19th and 20th, we'll have Oktoberfest. Some of you will be listening to this podcast in time to attend to that. And some of you will be listening to this podcast and wishing you had attended it, but just learned about it now.
There we go. Well, that's good beer. Cheers.
Cheers. So in the summer of 1520, the Pope is going to release this bull of excommunication, and he's got this plan of how it's going to arrive in Germany. Johann Eck and Guillermo Allende are given the job to hand deliver it throughout Germany. Part of the way a bull of excommunication works is if people read it. And so Eck is given the dangerous job of delivering it in the region of Saxony. The reception is hostile, but Eck has been given the guarantee of safe passage.
So the release of Exsurge Domine is a major turning point in the political environment for Frederick. This is when things really escalated to a point where he could no longer really control either the Pope or Luther. Things, up until this point, Frederick very masterfully was sort of...
He's proactively laying groundwork for each thing to happen.
Yes.
But now he's become more reactive.
Yeah. And at this point, the Pope has really came out with the big guns. Okay, he's excommunicated with Exsurge Domine. And Luther is going to... We'll get into how he responds in a little bit. But, But thankfully for Frederick, he's laid the groundwork that he's unbiased. So he's just going to sort of retreat to that position of, this is all over my head. I have, and keep himself out of the mix. And
Luther's going to respond to that kind of indifference with a treatise that is going to ask the Christian nobility to no longer become indifferent.
Right.
And so he writes a treatise in 1520 called To the Christian Nobility of the German Nation Concerning the Reform of the Christian Estate. We've specifically reviewed this in a previous podcast, but a quick summary is that it outlines Luther's thoughts on how the Pope has abused his position to take control of government authority and power. So the church and state have become so blended together, it has damaged the ability of the church to speak the gospel and has endangered the power of the state to rule locally.
Yes, and to, because during this period, the church has the authority to do all sorts of terrible things, and no accountability to anybody.
So this treatise, this open letter, is going to ask the nobles to step forward, and secure the state by helping Luther reform the church.
Now,
he doesn't want the state to reform the church, but essentially create the space for the reform to happen.
And to discipline, to have the courage to discipline the greatest excesses of the church. Now, the princes, the German princes, of course, were thrilled with this. Like I said previously in this episode, the princes during this time are pretty happy with Luther. They love the open letter to the Christian nobility. Even princes who had been against Luther up until this point said, "Oh, he sort of has a point here. This is good stuff." And so there was this very brief period between the release of the open letter to the Christian nobility and then the next major document that came out, which was the Babylonian captivity of the church, where Luther had pretty much most of the princes on his side, and it was an interesting period there, and so Frederick takes advantage of this period, and is working with the emperor to try to get something set up for a council where Luther can be evaluated.
And this council, the conciliary movement, is a powerful event in this time period of the church. And the thought is the Pope has a certain amount of authority, but the church, when it's brought together as one and acts in a council fashion, speaks with an authority that is equally matched to the Pope. And so the great ambition is call a council, get everybody in the same room, and if all those people speak with one voice, it is equal to the one voice of the Pope.
And that is certainly one thing that Luther is hoping for. On we'll say a consolation prize would be to have this thing that Frederick has been asking for. Something where Luther can present to a disinterested or to get a fair hearing in Germany someplace, which ultimately becomes the Diet of Worms.
Yes.
It's this sort of, maybe we can get Luther to come out and we'll
And the Diet of Worms, which we're going to talk about a little bit, is not a great church council, but it is a great event.
Right.
Interesting little side note in this time period that kind of lets us know of the political influence Frederick has involves the events of October 1520.
Right.
So Charles is prepared to be crowned as King of Germany in Aachen. This is the place where Charlemagne the Great was enthroned. There are relics for the three wise men there. The cathedral in Aachen is one of the kind of famous cathedrals of Germany. And it's supposed to happen. Frederick's going to be there, and he's been given the specific role of holding high the sword of the empire while Charles is enthroned. Frederick becomes ill. He is not able to make the trip to Aachen. Instead, he gets stuck in Cologne. And this lets us know Frederick's power. Charles stops the events happening in Aachen and moves the whole enthronement to Cologne, where Frederick is at, so that Frederick can do that job of holding the sword high.
That is amazing. That all Frederick had to do was grab grab the sword, and basically, I'm assuming it didn't really say in the documents, but it looks like it's sort of like how a king knights somebody, that he was going to actually sort of do that for the emperor, for Charles. And Charles said, I don't want it done by anybody else. It's going to be done by Frederick. We're moving the whole party. Thousands of people moving to a different city at the last minute. And these are not small potato people. These are big deal. These are the big shots of the empire, all going to some new city with no reservations or anything. They just sort of show up so that they can be there with Frederick. It's amazing the amount of respect and power Frederick had through this period.
And now the other thing that's happening this fall is Frederick is staying obstinate that there has to be this fair, convenient hearing. And there is a conversation that takes place between Guillermo Aleander to the Pope's relative and confidant, Cardinal Medici. And the section of the letter about Frederick starts off by saying this: "This Saxon is certainly an able prince, but is led astray by his counselors, who are all disciples of Luther."
Right. And so even in person, Frederick was able to sell the idea that he was just a disinterested party in all this, trying to do the right thing.
A true defender of the faith just happens to have a few counselors that are misleading him right now.
Frederick was amazingly, the word that was used to describe him over and over again was taciturn. And it's not a word we hear very often, but taciturn, I guess I've always heard taciturn sort of like grumpy is what I always assumed it was. But no, it's just somebody who's taciturn just keeps their thoughts to themselves. And that is certainly Frederick. Frederick doesn't let anybody on to what he's thinking, except if he wants you to, whatever he wants you to see is what he lets you see.
This letter also has a section where Aleander says, "He," that's referring to Frederick, "is angry at us, I hear, on account of a commendam to which his natural son had been appointed in Rome, notwithstanding which, and although in possession of the certificate of appointment, he was obliged on his return to Germany to pay a large sum to a cardinal." So Frederick is not married, and Frederick has no official sons, but he does have a mistress, which we earlier talked about how some reforms that were happening in the church made his relationship with his mistress a little bit more complicated.
So Frederick's mistress or concubine is Anna. He's really his wife. She's really his wife. But he was not allowed to take. She's not noble. She's not a noble woman, and because she was a commoner, he wasn't allowed to marry her, and so he was stuck. He loved her. That's who he wanted, and that's the only woman he was ever with was Anna. So this was the love of his life, and he took her as a concubine and had children with her, but they weren't recognized as a marriage.
So Aleander thinks that some of Frederick's anger with the Pope is not about Luther, but is about his natural-born son who had gone to Rome with a letter of appointment and was rejected and now has to come back and pay a big fine.
Right, and was forced to pay a fine by a cardinal. So there was a member of the Roman Catholic Church, a powerful person within the Roman Catholic Church, who's shaking down Frederick's kid, and big surprise, Frederick's not happy about that.
The book that we kind of use as our background about Frederick doesn't go into a lot of detail about this, but it does give us the sense that Luther has some struggles of how to navigate this time. And is Frederick upset about his son? Is he upset about Luther? How can we make him happy? That's kind of some of the Pope's desire.
Yeah, Frederick is using this little issue with. It's impossible to know what was going through Frederick's mind because even people at the time had no clue what was going through Frederick's head. But you can sort of conjecture would be that Frederick was basically throwing out road bumps for the Pope. It's like, you want to do business with me? Well, part of the reason I'm not working with you on this Luther thing is because you're treating my kid like crap. And so he's giving him continually working every angle to give himself more flexibility in his negotiations with the Pope.
So also in this lead up of the fall of 1520, a lot of this, the fall of 1520 events are a little push this way, a little pull that way, all because in the end of 1520 comes the deadline of an answer to the Bull of Excommunication. And so everyone's taking this time period from June to the late winter of 1520 to kind of determine how should we respond to this Bull of Excommunication.
Right.
One of the ways that Frederick is going to try to equip himself for this response is in November 5th of 1520, meeting with Erasmus in Cologne. Erasmus, influential at this time. He also is a counselor to the emperor, kind of giving voice to the emperor's design for some reforms as well. And Erasmus is seeking reform in the church, but not in a theological way, more of a functional way.
Yeah.
But Erasmus is known for hiding his thoughts, so taciturn like Frederick. And Frederick didn't want to talk around the question, so he asked Erasmus directly for his opinion on Luther, which is unusual for Frederick.
For Frederick and Erasmus.
Yes.
They're not very forthright people, but yeah, they actually came out and said what they were thinking at this.
And Erasmus said, "My big concern is the church getting split."
Right.
And this, I think, is that, I suppose, somewhat of a challenge still between the Catholic Church and Protestants is, at least online, some of the debate about Catholics and why they wouldn't be Protestants is that Protestants, all they do is split and divide. That they have an argument and they split. They have a conflict and they divide. And that's why there's all these Protestant churches, is that they don't know how to maintain unity.
Yeah. Well, during that discussion, one of the things Erasmus suggested was having a secular hearing to talk about Luther and find out, to come to a conclusion on Luther. And Frederick really liked that idea.
So he wrote to the Pope's representative, Aleander, to address the Pope's demands to have Luther's books burned and Luther turned over to the Pope. And Frederick wrote, he's willing to have Luther examined.
Right.
Reasonable, educated, pious, irreproachable judges. he said he would not have Luther's books burned without having first completed the examination.
Frederick followed that up with a letter to the emperor requesting Luther be examined at the next Reichstag, which is the Diet of Worms, scheduled to be held in Worms, of course. The emperor agreed, and so everything was chugging along pretty well.
And everybody knew the church was corrupt and needed to be reformed. And so there was this anticipation. This was an excellent chance that in an impartial hearing, Luther's teachings could become a vehicle for this reform to finally happen.
But just at that time, Luther released the Babylonian captivity of the church.
So in October of 1520, the Babylonian captivity gets published, and it is essentially a statement, a lengthy description of all the ways that the church has abused and corrupted the sacraments so that they become manipulations of power rather than distributions of grace.
So if you think about the seven sacraments of both the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, they're basically guards at every major point in life. So you have baptism at birth, you have
so you got baptism, you've got confirmation.
Which is 10, 12?
Yeah, you've got the vocations,
So you become a priest or a nun. That's early 20s.
You've got marriage.
Again, early 20s. You can't do any of these without the blessing of the Pope.
The Lord's Supper, and then you've got extreme unction, the distribution of oil to the ill.
Yeah. And so each one of these become like gates that they have to go in order to do this in a way that's going to be God-pleasing. These people want to be God-pleasing. In order to do this, to do whatever it is, to get married or to die or to be born or become an adult in confirmation, you have to go to the church. In order to do it in a God-pleasing way, you have to go to the church and get their blessing on it. And each one of these is ways to manipulate manipulate people for money and power, and to sort of position the church in a way, especially during this very corrupt period.
Gatekeeping is a good phrase for this. It reminds me, I was just recently reading about how China has dealt with congestion of vehicles in its large cities. And one of the ways they've done this is not by limiting who can buy a car, but who can buy a license plate.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so by controlling the license plates, they get the vehicles off the road. And so Martin Luther's Babylonian captivity is a document. After we finish this series on Frederick the Wise, we're going to go pretty deep in depth to that. Maybe already you want to start reading the Babylonian captivity to get ready for that discussion. But we're going to talk about how that release in fall of 1520 starts to really divide the followers of Luther from those who are looking for functional reforms and those who really are hungry for the spiritual reforms.
Right.
So this is going to be the end of episode 6 on our series about Frederick the Wise and his involvement in shaping the Reformation. And we look forward to our next episode where we're going to talk about the Diet of Worms and then the kidnapping of Luther and how all of the events that take place there really start to show that Frederick is not this uninterested observer, but he is the one that in a temporal way protects and cares for Luther, even while, of course, the Lord is at work in all of this.
Until next time, cheers.